if there's ever a time where we needed to pull together as believers of Christ and unite and try to strengthen and make the world a better place, it's now.
Mm-hmm. And that sounds like he's preaching our message.
There's one body, one church, one spirit, one hope. The realities of the faith, the realities that unify us are already there.
Christ prayed for unity. What should we be praying for? I mean, it's the one prayer request of Jesus. Think about it. In the Bible, that we actually have a say in whether or not it comes to fruition or not.
I think in what God has done in you guys in this podcast and the multitude of folks that you're reaching, the diversity, whatever God intended when you started this, He's able to bring it to completion.
All right, everyone. Welcome back to the Whole Church Podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Joshua Knoll, here with your other co-host, the one, the only, TJ Tiberius Juan Blackwell.
Howdy.
Yes. Got a very exciting episode for everyone today. TJ is going to explain to us all about his favorite parts of dragon lore, as well as maybe mentioning Genesis 9 and alcohol. We'll find out about that last part.
Biblical dragons time.
We are going to be talking about Genesis 9 and alcohol and different views on that. But before we jump in, I want to review some of our audience's answers to last week's silly question. So here's my top 3. I've been limited to top 3 by my boss, TJ. Yeah. Number 3 is going to be from Erin Hardy. She said Mermaid Man was her favorite aquatic cartoon character. Other 2 favorite aquatic cartoon characters, and this one was close. In second place is only second place because he's only semi-aquatic. Someone said Perry the Platypus. That was Jake Dobrance, one of our future guests on the podcast, said Perry the Platypus, though he's only semi-aquatic, which is correct, which is why he's second place. And I'm giving my brother first place this week. He said the penguins of Madagascar, and I just thought that was a great answer.
Listen, hold on. Penguins are also semi-aquatic.
Nah, if you Google it, it says aquatic birds. Whereas the other one, it does say semi-aquatic, really? So you know.
That's just incorrect. Anyway. So, silly question for this week. If you could slime anyone in history at any time, who and when would you slime? Josh,
do you want me to go first?
Yeah, you go first.
Okay, so I was going to say Abraham Lincoln during the Gettysburg Address, because I think that would be hilarious. But I'm going to back out of that, as I don't want anyone to think that I'm trying to get the South to rise again or anything. Actually, I'm going to say my Papa, right before he jumped out and scared me one of the many times that he did, simply because he would find that hilarious, and I would find it a lot funnier than him jumping out and scaring me. So, I'll go with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so mine is not known to many people because the person I want to slime isn't famous. But my great-grandpa, during World War II, when he got taken prisoner of war, he got taken at the Battle of the Bulge. They walked them off the mountain, lined them up, and made them empty their pockets. And he pulled out just a huge onion out of his pocket. Because he was carrying around a big onion to eat later.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, and the German officer that spoke English was like, "You're going to want to put that back. You're going to need that." And I would have slimed him right then. That would have been hilarious.
Oh, God, that sounds priceless.
Yeah.
Man, I can't wait to hear other people's answer to this one. It's going to be great.
Yeah. All right, so to get into it today, we wanted to start off by reading Genesis 9:20 through 26. 20 through 27. And it goes that this is from the Christian Standard Bible. Noah, as a man of the soil, began by planting a vineyard. He drank some of the wine, became drunk, and uncovered himself inside his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father naked and told his 2 brothers outside. Then Shem and Japheth took a cloak and placed it over both their shoulders, and walking backward, they covered their father's nakedness. Their faces were turned away, and they did not see their father naked. When Noah awoke from his drinking and learned what his youngest son had done to him, he said, Canaan is cursed. He will be the lowest of slaves to his brothers. He also said, Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem. Let Canaan be Shem's slave. Let God extend Japheth. Let Japheth dwell in the tents of Shem. Let Canaan be Shem's slave.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there are a few different debates that happen with these verses, and we're going to talk about some of the bigger stuff later on in the episode. But I do want to remind everyone, our goal isn't to settle anything, right? We want to just discuss what other beliefs are, so that we can see where unity can and can't happen. So, with that in mind, before we talk about drunkenness, because that is one of the themes of this passage, we want to talk about the actual meaning of this passage and some of the other debates that are associated with it. So first, you see the parallel of Genesis 2 and 3, I guess. And that's sort of where, in Genesis 2 and 3, God planted. Here in Genesis 9, Noah plants. Then you have the fruit of good and evil that grown up, and you have the vineyard that grew up. And Adam ate and was shameful. Noah ate, was found in his nakedness, which was also seen to be shameful. And the big difference being that in Genesis 2 and 3, God clothed Adam and Eve, but here, Shem and Japheth were the ones who clothed Noah. So that's sort of the big difference. Is here, these men were being agents of God, and thus we are going to see here in the next couple chapters the beginning of God's chosen people. So that's sort of one of the real messages behind it. The other message is the real sin of this passage. The real sin that it brings up, not that drunkenness isn't a sin, but that's not where the focus is here. The focus is on the sin of Canaan, who went and looked at Noah while he was naked. So, whether that sin be that he was pornographic, whether he was mocking his elder, being disrespectful to an elder or his father-in-law, whatever it may be, that act was the sinful act in this passage. That was the fault that this passage focuses on. So we want to keep that in mind. We also want to keep in mind there's so many most of the arguments here, which we're going to see all throughout the Bible, and we usually won't take the time to focus on them, are going to be these little arguments where there's just parts of the scripture that's kind of confusing. Like, so Shem and Japheth both clothed Noah, right? They both do this good act. And yet, in the passage of cursings and blessings, he curses Canaan for his sin, naturally. But then it's like, okay, Shem's going to do great, and Japheth, you're going to be his servant. You're going to live in his tents. It'll be great. Well, why does the Bible say that? And there's a lot of arguments back and forth. One of the key parts is, in that passage, it talks about Japheth, and then the next line says he. And for us English-speaking people, we associate pronouns with the last proper noun. So we just say, so that he is Japheth. Japheth will dwell in Shem's tents. However, the word they use for he and some of the direct objects really makes it look like it could have been saying that God was dwelling in Shem's tent. So one of the arguments people have is it Japheth or God that's meant to be dwelling in Shem's tents? And our answer is, we don't know. It doesn't really matter. We can be united. If you think Japheth dwelt in that guy's tents, or if you think God dwelt in that guy's tent, it does not matter to today's context really at all. But that's just the little arguments, and that's the stuff that we have about the actual text today. However, you're going to see, Deeja's going to take us in a little minute, and we're going to focus on that other kind of, the idea of drunkenness and drinking and alcohol in the Bible, even though that wasn't the main topic of this passage. We want to be clear on that. It was sort of what was used to make other sin happen. And that's going to be important later on in this discussion.
So we, of course, talked to our prestigious group of profound thinkers at the Whole Church Think Tank on Facebook for this topic.
Which is just some of our previous guests and a few other people.
Mm-hmm. There was a small amount of discourse that occurred, as it always does when this topic is brought up. So I'll go over a little bit of that, not the whole thing. We don't have enough time for the entire episode, actually. That's not true. But we had a friend of ours, Niles Merritt, mention that the topic has been heavily influenced in the United States by fundamentalist prohibitionist legalism. other cultures outside the U.S., alcohol doesn't have the same taboo status in the church. They'll use wine in their Lord's Supper. That's pretty much the only example I know of, for I'm simply not that intelligent. But he goes on with scriptural support. I think he gives us like 5, maybe 6 scriptures. He also added that Spurgeon smoked, David danced, and there are scriptures encouraging casting lots, which is gambling.
Yeah. Well, he also mentioned Luther drank a lot of beer.
Martin Luther, German.
Yeah.
Drank his beer, drank it warm.
So surprising.
He was German. Yeah. But in response to that, with the support of that, he said, clearly drinking alcohol is not sinful, and in certain instances it is encouraged, but drunkenness and alcoholism, on the other hand, are sinful. And thought that was really, he really laid it all out there. He expected us to say this and already had written up his answer.
Yeah, it was pretty great. And Kelly O'Sullivan, I remember he agreed wholeheartedly with that.
Mm-hmm.
And he's been on the podcast before.
Yeah, good guy, that Kelly.
Yeah.
And then, one of our other good friends of the podcast, Chris Galloway, he said, hey, I think you guys should do an episode on this. Basically.
Oh, are we going to?
I don't know. I'd have to ask Josh. But, he said, tackle drinking, because drunkenness will send you to hell. Not tithing is between you and the Lord. And then that sparked another little thing here. But that's beside our point. And so we, of course, polled them. We gave them the options of, hey, what do you think? Is getting drunk a sin, but drinking is not? Drinking at all is a sin. And we had one other. Well, we had an option for other, and we had one person choose that. But out of the 7 votes, I think it was, 5 of them said getting drunk is a sin, but drinking is not. 1 said drinking at all is a sin, and 1 person said other. And then we just wanted to let you guys know that this is... we're not aiming to settle any arguments here. We clearly cannot. What we want to do is to best understand the other perspectives and discover how we can all be united across the varying views. We believe that educating ourselves on others' beliefs is a major key to unity and peace with others, which you can see if you listen to our episodes, basically any of them, where we're talking to someone with different beliefs, or, their own beliefs. And the point is to find unity with these people.
Yeah. Which is why we do the poll and think tank, too, because it's interesting, because, to me, I really thought a lot more people would have voted that drinking at all was a sin. It turned out pretty much everyone in our think tank, which includes a lot of Protestants, a Catholic, an Orthodox, whatever. But most of them seem to agree that, drinking isn't a sin, but being drunk is, which I found interesting.
Mm-hmm. Which is exactly what we're going to talk about next. Moderationism. Probably, I would say, the most popular view outside of the U.S., at least. They're worldwide, probably the most popular view. Abstentionism, I think is the way you say that, is probably close to it in the U.S. But moderationism is the idea that drinking is okay, but getting drunk is a sin. That's, everything you do in moderation. Everything is bad for you in excess, that thing. And, Catholics, Orthodox churches, Anglicans, Lutherans, modern Reformed churches, and as well as most modern church fathers, St. Augustine, Jerome, Thomas Aquinas, Martin Luther, they held to this view.
Yeah. Which
seems pretty reasonable to me.
Yeah. Pretty much all historical Christian leaders believed that. And, it it is interesting that so many people believe that way and how we've changed now. And we're going to get to that later, but a lot of that has to do with how people think alcohol has changed in general, wine and that kind of stuff. But we'll talk about that later on. It's important to note, though, we talk about a lot on here, especially in the speed rounds. We ask people their emphasis on tradition because, like the Catholic Church has tradition and the Bible as like hand in hand in authority. Like the Methodist Church equates tradition as really authoritative. And when you have tradition as that important, it's significant that St. Augustine and all these other church leaders and our tradition never believed drinking was a sin. It makes it a lot harder to get away from that idea if you're putting so much emphasis on tradition. In fact, St. Augustine and a lot of the church fathers from the first couple centuries actually taught that moderation in alcohol and just in general, moderation is a cardinal virtue. In just the same way that gluttony is a deadly sin. And most of our church fathers kind of just treated drunkenness as a form of gluttony, which is why they considered it a sin in the first place and why they thought it was written in the Bible as a sin, because drunkenness is gluttony. It's when you drink so much, something bad happens. Yeah. Now, even some church leaders all through history, including some modern ones, one guy I really like is Kevin DeYoung, who I don't think he's a modern moderationist, but I'm not sure, so don't quote me on that. But he points out that gluttony isn't overeating one time, but it's rather the act of focusing too much on food. Just because I stuffed myself at Thanksgiving yesterday doesn't mean that I am a glutton. It means that I overate once. To say that you or have committed gluttony is I overate much and all I'm thinking of for the next week are giant meals every single dinner. That is gluttony, not overeating one time. A lot of people will use that kind of mindset and also say the same thing is true as drunkenness. Where the Bible talks about drunkenness, it's talking about people who are focusing on drinking and want to be drunk all the time and are living a lifestyle of drunkenness, not just they got drunk one time. Now, that's not a major popular view, so we're not going to spend a lot of time thinking about it, but that is some people do believe that way, where that getting drunk isn't necessarily a sin even, but living in drunkenness is. Uh-huh. But that's not as popular.
Right. But the strength of this position is its stress on personal responsibility and how it takes consideration of Bible verses that support drinking, as well as the verses that condemn drunkenness. Verses such as Ecclesiastes 9:7, which says, "Go, eat your bread with pleasure, and drink your wine with a cheerful heart, for God has already accepted your works." It's a celebration of works being accepted. Psalms 104:14 and 15 says, "He causes grass to grow for the livestock and provides crops for man to cultivate, producing food from the earth. Wine that makes human hearts glad, making his face shine with oil, and bread that sustains human hearts." It goes on. It doesn't go on, but 1 Peter 4:3 says, or 4:3 says, "For there has already been enough time spent in doing what the Gentiles chose to do, carrying on in unrestrained behavior, evil desires, drunkenness, orgies, carousing, and lawless idolatry." And then Ephesians 5:18 says, "And don't get drunk with wine, which leads to reckless living, but be filled by the Spirit." That's just a few verses from throughout the Bible where it's, drinking is okay. Getting drunk is not. Getting drunk is bad. We don't like those people. But anyway.
You know what I found out?
What'd you find out?
I didn't mean to interrupt you. I found out that the word for wine is used over 70 times in the Bible. One of the words, there's 8 different words for wine in the Bible, but you know what I mean.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just crazy.
It's, mankind and alcohol goes hand in hand throughout time. But that's a topic for a different podcast entirely. But so the greatest weakness in this belief is that drinking may put a stumbling block in front of other brothers and sisters who struggle with alcoholism. And drinking at all makes it easier to get drunk and to fall into drunkenness, such as in Romans 14:20 and 21. "Do not tear down God's work because of food. Everything is clean, but it is wrong to make someone fall by what he eats. It is a good thing not to eat meat, or drink wine, or do anything that makes your brother or sister stumble." And that speaks to more than just drunkenness.
Wait, so you think if I drink, I could get drunk?
Yeah, it seems that way.
Crazy.
At least biblically.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, it's about not partaking in these actions that others struggle with. But we have a quote from Martin Luther, who was not to appeal to authority, but, Martin Luther. He says, we must not reject or condemn anything because it is abused. Wine and women bring many a man to misery and make a fool of him. So we would need to kill all the women and pour out all the wine. It's like one of those shock tactics.
Yeah, that's a pretty strong argument.
Yeah, like it's like a modest proposal by some Irish guy.
That's a good short story, though.
It is. It's like he's talking about how this is so bad, and he's like, well, I have a solution. We'll start eating children.
Yeah. If you haven't read that story, you should.
Yeah, and he just proposed it seriously, and it's like it's supposed to wake people up. You're like, well, we can't just do that because that's not how you solve a problem. Yeah. But anyway, the next view we wanted to look at was abstentionism. Abstentionism is essentially the Bible isn't against drinking, but we still abstain because we know it is the wiser choice. And that is mostly a modern belief held by Baptists, Pentecostals, Nazarenes, Methodists, and most modern evangelicals, notably Billy Graham, John Piper, Albert Mohler. And that is what our denomination believes in.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Which, just by the way, Baptists are kind of torn on this, which we'll talk about that later, but half of Baptists are actually prohibitionists.
Right.
But yeah, no, so this idea, it primarily rose with, in America, which, that's what Niles was mentioning earlier in our think tank segment. It came up with the ideas of prohibition in some of the temperance movement of the Second Great Awakening, which, if you don't know much about that, look into it. It's an important part of American history. But alcoholism was actually banned in America for a time.
Not alcoholism, just alcohol.
Yeah, thank you.
Which I guess also alcoholism.
Yeah.
But all alcohol, period.
Yeah.
So the greatest strength of this stance is that it puts a special stress on personal holiness and is cautious of putting stumbling blocks in front of other brothers and sisters.
Yeah, and this view, it'll point to covenants in the Bible that talk about how to get closer to God, right? There's the Nazarene vow where people were especially close to God if they did this extra vow. Like they didn't need to do that to be part of God's people or to be saved. But it said, if you want to be Nazarene, it's like God's best friends are Nazarenes, do these things. And one of those things was to abstain from alcohol. And in Proverbs 31:4, he talks about how the proverbist, he says, it's wise for kings to not drink. Well, if it's wise for kings to not drink, and if being closer to God is, being a Nazarene vow, you don't drink, then we could probably be closer to God also by not drinking. Sort of kind of the mindset of people who take that view.
And in Numbers 6:1, it says, speak to the Israelites and tell them, when a man or woman makes a special vow, a Nazirite vow, to consecrate himself to the Lord, he is to abstain from wine and beer, which is, what kind of that idea, like, hey, maybe if we do it, we'll get closer to God. But he must not drink vinegar made from wine or beer. He must not drink any grape juice or eat fresh grapes or raisins. He is not to eat anything produced by the grapevine, from seeds to skin, during the period of his consecration, which is taking the whole thing and going like a whole nother step. Like, we aren't going to drink, and we aren't going to partake of anything that could be used to make a drink.
Yeah. Which is important because some of the words in the Bible for wine is actually grape juice, but we'll talk about that later. But also some of the words are definitely talking about alcoholic beverages. So, but that's why it says both of those things here, because,
the greatest weakness of the stance is that it may lead people into denying a freedom and source of joy that God intended for his people to have and enjoy.
Yeah. So one verse people who argue against abstentionism. Moderationism. People like to use this to argue against it. And they'll read from Nehemiah 8, 9, and 10. It's then Nehemiah, who was the governor, and Ezra, the priest and scribe, and the Levites, who taught the people, said to all the people, "This day is holy to the Lord your God. Do not mourn or weep." So what was happening is they just got Jerusalem back, the Israelites did, and they're learning the Bible again for the first time for a lot of them. So that's kind of the context behind here. It says, for all the people were weeping when they heard the words of the law. They realized, hey, we've been doing bad stuff, guys. It says, but then Ezra said to them, "Go eat of the fat, drink of the sweet, and send portions to him who has nothing prepared, for this day is holy to our Lord. Do not be grieved, for the joy of the Lord is your strength." And so it's kind of tying the joy of the Lord and, drinking and eating and having a good time all together. And it actually is, that was right before they tell them to enjoy the Feast of Booths. Feast of Booths is basically Jewish Thanksgiving. We just had our Thanksgiving yesterday, so it's interesting we're talking about that now. But what they would do is they celebrated the harvest of food by eating the food, and then celebrated the harvest of the vine by drinking wine. So it's a big drinking holiday for Jews as well, or especially at that time. So when he says, hey, go drink of the sweet, he's saying, hey, y'all go have a good time. And that's what a lot of people who argue against this say, hey, you're missing out on one of the joys of God, something that he wants us to enjoy. That's that argument against this.
Mm-hmm. And John Wesley was abstentionist. He said, "You see the wine when it sparkles in the cup and are going to drink of it. I tell you there is poison in it, and therefore beg you to throw it away." That's just...
Which John Wesley was like the founder of Methodism and pretty much the founder of this stance. Not really, but he popularized it.
But that's just one fellow over there saying his thing. Just John Wesley.
Hey everyone, we just wanted to take a quick break to tell you all the ways you can help us keep this show going. Your favorite Church Unity podcast.
Yeah, so support us on Patreon for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/The Whole Church Podcast. Every dollar counts. Subscribe to our show at your favorite podcast provider, whatever that may be. Leave a review for us on Apple Podcasts. Follow us on social media. Share this episode on your own social media. And you can subscribe to our newsletter by emailing us at thewholechurch@gmail.com.
Mm-hmm. Especially that last one. It really keeps you guys updated on what we're doing better than pretty much anything else. Let's get back to the show.
But anyway, the next view we wanted to discuss was prohibitionism, which is the belief that alcohol is prohibited by the Bible. Not the same as federal prohibitionism, because those are laws and no longer in fact function. But anyway, some Southern Baptist churches, Seventh-day Adventists, the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints, and including Charles Spurgeon, they believed drinking is just expressly prohibited by the Bible.
Well, some of them don't think it's necessarily from the Bible, but they think it's a sin. So, yeah. This belief became popular during the time of Woodrow Wilson, the 28th president of the United States of America, because that was the time where it was federal prohibitionism, where he made it outlawed in America. And the idea both of the federal prohibitionism and, the more religious stance that some people take is basically that alcohol and drinking led to higher crime rates. It led to higher homeless rates. It led to a lot of health issues with people. And these are all things that Christians should care about, right? We don't want more crime. We don't want homeless issues. And as such, our government said, we're just going to take alcohol away. It'll solve all those problems. And Christians were like, you know what? These do lead to all of those problems. Yeah, and that's where some Christian groups, like the ones TJ mentioned above, were like, yeah, let's just not have any alcohol at all.
Right.
And that's why they believe it's a sin, because sin leads to death. And clearly, alcohol was leading to death in these situations.
Mm-hmm. And, that went about as well as telling Americans they can't do something always goes.
Yeah,
maybe
like
less
10 years,
so.
maybe.
Yeah. But not only did it last 10 years, it was completely unsuccessful for those 10 years.
Yeah. That's why they stopped trying. They're like, no one's going to listen to this.
But the greatest strength in this stance is that it appeals to that call for us to care for people and recognize the negative effects of alcoholism in a society, which is something we should care about. But
yeah, amen.
Not necessarily something people should be prohibited from doing. The greatest weakness of this stance is that it calls sin what the Bible has not called sin.
Yeah. Adding and taking away. There's something about that in Revelation. It says not to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, so both prohibitionists and abstentionists, man, these words are difficult, guys. They both like to argue that in the Bible, where it was primarily grape juice, or it was a lot harder to get drunk on, sort of their argument is that the wine in the Bible wasn't the same as the wine today. A lot of times they'll talk about how the process of it being made, a lot of things were done to keep it from being alcohol. In some cases, that was true. There was wine that was not ever turned into alcohol. And they had different words for that. That's still translated as wine, as the wine that's alcoholic. And they had a bunch of different words for these different kinds of wine, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what people will say is it was a lot harder to get drunk because, they add water to it or something like that, which, as you may know, we do still add water to wine today. So it depends which scholars you talk to, right? They will all say that wine was prepared differently back then. But, the scholars who are part of prohibitionism or abstentionist will often look at it, especially Christian scholars, and say, see, wine used to be a lot less alcoholic. It was harder to get drunk on back then. And then a lot of your moderationist scholars or, secular scholars will look at it and say, yeah, it was made differently. However, if we look at the methods of how it was made and everything, they think it was likely 15 to 20% alcohol then in wine, whereas today it's 10 to 12% alcohol in wine. And it's like 3 to 5% in beer or something. Beer's a lot lower. Mm-hmm. So they use that to say, so it used to be a lot more alcoholic. And really, at the end of the day, it doesn't get us anywhere because we can't go back to time and see what alcohol was like then. And if we had alcohol from then, it would be a lot more fermented now because that would have been 1,000 years ago.
Right.
Yeah. So there's no way for us to really know. So these arguments that are trying to compare what it was like then to now really don't get us far in the debate because one set of scholars will say one thing, the other say another thing, that there's no way for us to verify.
Right. And a lot of those differences that have happened over the past 1,000 years about brewing alcohol have mostly been made either for safety reasons, or we found out that this makes it taste better, not necessarily for the alcohol content. Even for other drinks like mead, which is technically still wine, just made from honey.
Huh. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's crazy. Also, the oldest recorded alcoholic beverage ever.
Weird. I will say, I looked into some of this on my own time just because we were preparing this. And it's weird how many of the same methods we do use from the Romans and Greeks to now. Like, we were like, yeah, they just got it right.
Yeah. And then, we just made it a lot safer.
Yeah.
But that's like, mead used to be made over the course of a couple days. These days, it takes several months for a batch. But that's not the point. Anyway, the word used for wine in John 2 that Jesus made is the same word used in Ephesians 5:18 to warn against drunkenness.
Yeah, which basically just implies that the wine that Jesus, turned water into could get you drunk. It's the same word for both.
And in 1 Corinthians 11:20-22, Paul mentions and condemns people getting drunk off of the Lord's Supper at church meetings, which is significant. And then, Charles Spurgeon, another, just a guy, I guess, said, I wish the man who made the law to open them had to keep all the families that have brought to ruin. Beer shops are the enemies of the home. Therefore, the sooner their licenses are taken away, the better, which is, just another call against alcohol being available.
Yeah.
Like, if they had to take care of all the families that alcohol ruined, I'm sure they would see things differently.
Yeah. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. So we have a quote from 3 different major church leaders take different positions on this. Which then begs the question, unity of these positions. Can we have unity? And I would say, yeah, I don't think Charles Spurgeon thought of Martin Luther as a heathen. I think he still thought Martin Luther was a Christian, even though Charles Spurgeon was a prohibitionist and Martin Luther liked him some beer. I think they disagreed strongly, but I don't think they would have called one another non-Christian, if that makes sense. There are some great challenges that come to unity, though. First, I want to focus on the moderationist side, right? So if you believe that drinking is okay and drunk is not, some of the challenges that come with this, or a lot of people believe with that stance, you have to have real wine for the Eucharist. When you're doing the Lord's Supper, if you're not drinking actual alcoholic wine, you're not really doing the Lord's Supper. You're doing that sacrament incorrectly.
Right.
Now,
and that's because in John 2, it's revealed that is alcoholic wine that he turns blood into, or water into. But
yeah. And,
not because of it, but supported by it.
Yeah. And some churches say if you're not doing that sacrament correctly, the way that it's done in the Bible, then you're missing a major part of fellowship with Jesus. Now, pretty much most of the place, that's where that argument stops. And if you just think someone's missing out on a part of the fellowship they could be having, you can still think they're saved. That's not a big deal. But some people believe that you have to, and there's very few, but there are churches who believe you have to do the Lord's Supper correctly to be saved at all. And if that's the case, and you think that it has to be real alcohol, then all of a sudden, a lot of your Christian brothers and sisters from Protestant churches are no longer saved by your view. And you can't have Christian unity if you don't think they're saved at all. And that's just kind of where that sits. It's unfortunate, but that's not really a barrier we can bridge. If you think someone's not saved, you can't have Christian unity with them because you don't think they're a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And one of the other great challenges to unity from this would be from the prohibitionist side, not only because their view directly counter.
Yeah.
I don't know the right word.
Counters.
I guess.
Yeah.
But the other two views. But they add to what the Bible says. And that can cause a rift in the church in that we must agree on the Bible as our primary foundation, which we've seen cause many, many schisms in the church, which we've talked about before. Go find that episode. But the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints teaches that from their word of wisdom that alcohol, caffeine, and all mind-altering drugs are expressly forbidden.
Yeah.
Which is sacred information to them. So that's really different.
From them, that means to be part of their church, you cannot drink. But because the word of wisdom isn't necessarily saying these things are sin, I think they can still have Christian unity. I'm not really sure on that. We would have to ask our friends who are part of that church. Maybe we will one day.
Mm-hmm. The other challenge from the prohibitionist stance is that, I've already kind of said this, but is that believing drinking is sin would mean that they could not unite with anyone living in sin, including moderationists.
Yeah.
Which, kind of a big group of people. Yeah. Kind of a big part of the church.
So the largest part of the church. Anyway. So I just kind of wanted to talk some about just some of the greatest things I've heard from people with different stances on this, because it's important. I have people close to me who take different stances in this. One great man of God I know who was moderationist once said, and this is kind of his stance on this, is that salvation is not just about heaven. It's about living in freedom in the joys that God has for us right now. So by living in freedom and in these joys, that's how we're a light to the world. Like God calls us to be salt and light. And living in that freedom and joy now is how we do that. And that's why, to him, it's important that we live in some of these freedoms. I thought that was a really good word from him. Some of the best words I've heard from kind of the other side against drinking, though. I won't say from who, but he said, it'd be so much better if I had to compare, and I'm going to get to heaven, and God's going to say something to me. I'd much rather him say, hey, man, you could have drank. It wouldn't have been a big deal. Than have him say, yeah, you shouldn't have done that. Guess where you get to go. And it's kind of much rather God be like, hey, you could have done that than say, you shouldn't have done that. And it's basically a large part of this comes to, if my pastor says this, and we're not telling anyone what they should or should not do and which stance to take. That's not our place. Our place is to find unity in the church. But what my pastor says is if you're not 1,000% sure of anything, if you're not 1,000% sure that what you're doing isn't pleasing to God, don't do it. It's pretty simple, right? If there's even a chance in your head that it is a sin, you should just not do that thing. Because why take that chance?
Right. It's like, if you have to ask the question, the answer is no.
Yeah.
Like, if you have to ask someone if this is a good idea, the answer is probably no. But that's, sometimes not. But if there's that much doubt, the safer choice is just to not do it.
Yeah.
In Matthew 15:11, it says, "It's not what goes into the mouth that defiles a person, but what comes out of the mouth. This defiles a person." So we can disagree on whether we think it is wiser to abstain from alcohol or to enjoy the gift God gave us. However, if we draw a line and call something sin, then we cannot be united in Christian unity with those we believe are living in sin, which goes back to that prohibitionist issue, which is a problem for Christian unity.
Yeah. Doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just a problem for unity.
Right.
Could be right.
Could be right. But even though our aim is not to tell you all how we believe or to settle the issue, we do think it is important to mention that our church is an abstentionist church, and we fully support our church. And then, Romans 12:18, it says, if possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone.
Amen.
Amen. Don't cause problems. You should always be doing your best to be at peace with others, because it's in the Bible.
Yeah.
The Bible tells us so.
Not. Even if you're living in sin, you still should have peace with them.
Right. Even if you're not a Christian. I mean, that's just
good advice.
Seems like the easiest way to live life.
Yeah.
But we hope this time has helped us all grow in our understanding of other positions so that we can be better united as the church.
The whole church.
The whole church. And more at peace with everyone than ever before. And if you don't feel like it helped you, listen to it again.
Keep listening until you feel like you understand better and are more okay with people who disagree with your position.
Or find us on social media. Tell us really angrily how you feel.
Maybe find a better podcast that can help you understand other positions.
True. Don't stop searching.
Yeah.
But, thanks for listening, guys. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your time, Josh.
Thank you for your time, TJ.
We like to get into our outro, and we like to start our outro with the God Moment segment, where we each share something that God has done for us recently, whether it be a blessing or a challenge or anything in between. So, Josh?
Yeah, I'm just going to say right now, I'm just super thankful for Thanksgiving. It is my favorite holiday. I got to see my family. I got to spend some extra time with my wife, have some time off work, eat a lot of turkey, which is my favorite food. And I'm just having a great week, man.
Nice.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I would like to say I've seen a lot of turkey slander over the past couple days.
How dare they?
Which I fully support, because turkey's not that good.
You're wrong.
No. But it doesn't stop people from going to Thanksgiving and enjoying, time with their families, however small their gathering may have been this year. And, I've seen a lot of people acknowledge that ham is better.
That's just not true.
God bless them, for they speak the truth.
You really like ham more than turkey?
Absolutely.
I barely can make myself eat ham like that.
That doesn't make any sense.
It's just not that good.
Also, a group of friends and I have decided that turkey is probably the worst poultry. So, God bless.
those friends are also wrong. Turkey is clearly the best meat that there is, other than maybe bacon. That's it.
Anyway, so future guests for the podcast. We are going to have Pastor Alan Rhodes, Jake Orens, who we mentioned here and before, from the Bible, but funnier podcast. Pastor C.T. Kirk, who is from our denomination, good guy. And, of course, at the end of the season, we are going to have one Mr. Francis Chan.
Who just doesn't know yet.
As soon as he finds out and agrees, then we'll interview him.
Yeah. All right. Thank you all for listening.